Well, I can get started with a little introduction and housekeeping and seeing if anyone else joins on. But I do want to welcome Lynn and Valerie here to talk about Dunwoody. This has been something that we've been trying to do for quite a few months. We started, initially we were planning for April, but here we are online doing it in November. Just had to check the date again. But yeah, so before we begin, I do want to mention that we are recording this, and generally it'll be on PowerPoint most of the time, but if you prefer not to have your video on, you can turn it off at this point. We are going to make it public. So if you would not like to be shown on video, you're more than welcome to turn off your video for that. Other than that, we welcome everyone to this. And yeah, let's see, pull up my notes. So Dr. Lynn C. Tinley and Valerie Biggerstaff will talk about the long history of the Donaldson-Bannister Farm. The home and farm were built in 1870 on property that was acquired by the descendants of the family in the 1821 land lottery. The farm is now located in a bustling suburban community of Dunwoody. And I love the fact that we're talking about Dunwoody because it's still part of DeKalb County. And it's just a great reminder that DeKalb County is, first of all, huge, but also just diverse in the areas that it covers in the metro area. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lynn first.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Happy to be here. Very happy to be here and finally give you our presentation that we've been wanting to give you for a while. So thank you. I'm going to start with the early settlement patterns of the area in general and then of Dunwoody. And then I'm going to hand it off to Valerie, and Valerie is going to be very more Dunwoody specific and the property specific kind of information. So this is an image. I love to start with this image. It's an image of Bullock Hall in Roswell. And I like to show this because if it hadn't been for Roswell, I mean, the area would have been settled anyway, but Roswell was established in the late 1830s, early 1840s, and really brought a lot of people to the area and really brought a lot of economic development to the area. And so that's why I like to start with this image. One of the really important things about this area, I don't know how many of you are really familiar with the geology of the area, if you will. Roswell and Dunwoody are located in the upper Piedmont region. So the map to the left shows you Georgia specifically, and then the map to the right is the southeast and the fall line. And it's really important to the history of the area because of the water power that it generated. And that is really why the people came to Roswell initially. It was recognized by Roswell King that it'd be a good area to harness water power to process cotton. Initially, of course, in the mountains, they came here initially because gold had been discovered. And then in the process, Roswell King said, well, that's interesting, but I think this is a really good area to actually start working in cotton. Specifically, I'm a textile historian, so I want to share a couple things with you about that. It's specifically short staple cotton, not long staple cotton. And it was made possible, if you will, to produce into cloth because of the perfection of the cotton gin in the late 18th century. So we're talking about short staple cotton that was grown by the farms all around the area. And Roswell Manufacturing Company was established in the 1850s. I'm going to mention this a little bit again, but at the Chattahoochee River where Roswell Road is now. And it was among some of the very early factories. There were a couple in Athens and Augusta, which are it's good. The map to the right is kind of nice to see because you can see Augusta on that map is at the south side of that real Piedmont area. But it was really novel that they came to this area to create a factory that actually processed cotton. The time they eventually had 3 factories for cotton, and they also had a wool factory. So of course, before large European settlement, what we had was Creek and Cherokee living territory in this area. So this map is a map of the Hightower Trail. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but it was actually a very important trading and communication route. And what's highlighted there is, if you look at the upper left corner, which is northwest, you see Shallow Ford, which is was basically Roswell Road and the Chattahoochee River are. And it follows all along down through what is today Dunwoody. And if you're looking about the middle of the map, you can see Dunwoody-Dekalb Drive, if you're familiar with this area, Temple Emmanuel, Spalding Drive, down through Dunwoody, and over to the bottom right, you'll see that it goes to basically Buford Highway at New Peachtree on the right there. So I show you this slide to show you that even though the early settlers who were coming in from the coast, from Virginia and the Carolinas, with the secession treaties, which I'll talk about in a minute, this was actually a pretty important area to begin with for the Creek and the Cherokee Indians. And a part of this was this Hightower Trail. And this trail was part of a larger communication and trade network that, if you look at this, it was called the Fusky Path. And the Fusky Path was from Augusta, you see there on the right, and spreading out. There's a lot of literature about spreading out over into Alabama, northern Alabama, central Alabama. And if you look at this particular map, you'll see that Hightower Trail is an offshoot of this Fusky Path. And so I tell you that to say, even though, again, the European settlers were coming here in mass, if you will, in the early 19th century, this was a land that had been familiar to people and was an important trade route, was this Hightower Trail, which is part of where we live now. So the area where Dunwoody was part of the Creek Secession Treaty of 1821. This map is color-coded to show the dates of these treaties. And even though they run from 1798 to the 1830s, I believe, are when the last ones are, but as early as 1798, white settlers were familiar with this area because the orange area was one of the first treaties, and that goes up to Lawrenceville. So even before we have white settlers coming into this area, and that's a whole nother story and lecture in itself, you know, that the treatment of the Creek and the Cherokee and everything, but they were very much familiar with this area. And we had people living in here in the late 18th century and living here as traders in the early 19th century. Mainly trading in deerskin. Okay, so one of the first settlers in this area was James Doris. He has had a trading post in Milton, which, as you know, is north of Roswell, in the early 1800s. And the interesting thing about James is not only that he had an early trading post, and there are account books from that trading post that used to be at the Roswell Presbyterian Church, and now I think they're at Columbia. So I haven't physically seen them. I've seen copies of them, I haven't seen them. But his wife, Nancy Cook, was actually Cherokee. And he and his wife settled here in the early 1800s. He was born in 1802 in South Carolina and came here and had a trading post and traded with Creek and Cherokee as well as the white settlers. And I'd like to show you, so this is pre-Civil War image of Roswell Manufacturing Company. It was along the Vickery Creek, which is on the north end of the the Chattahoochee River, right there about where Roswell Road is. It was established in the 1840s, but was very active by the 1850s. So what you're seeing is settlers coming in here and farming, subsistence farming, from the 1820s up through and even larger influxes into the 1840s and the 1850s, because this mill was producing yarn, rope, and cloth, and it started actually dyeing cloth. So it was selling check and striped fabric as well. And the wool fabric, there was a wool mill at the south end of this, right about at the Chattahoochee River, that was weaving wool. And one of their products was what was called Confederate gray. It was used for Confederate uniforms. It's not uncommon that you'll see it referred to as Roswell gray, but it was not referred to that way in the 19th century. It was always referred to, we have records selling the cloth that show that it was called Confederate gray. Oh, and so by this time, not only do you have in Roswell, this is pre-Civil War, they were really hopping. They had a factory village where people who worked in the factory would live, and they had stores. And they, if you haven't visited Bullock Hall or any of those places in Roswell, you really should. They're lovely antebellum homes, but it was a very active area. Roswell King came from Darien, Georgia, and he brought with him 5 other families. I'll talk about that in a minute, to settle the area. So this is a map of the area. It's actually interesting, pen and ink sketching on fabric. I get my maps from the Library of Congress website. They have really great maps. And so what I want, the odd thing about this map is that north is at the bottom of this map and south is at the top of this map. And so at the top of this map, what you see, number 2 is Decatur. Number 3 is Buckhead. It was even called Buckhead then, and Peachtree Road. Number 1 is Cross Keys, which is one of the early post offices in the area. And that is basically Brookhaven. And number 4 is what we call Dunwoody, and that's Providence Church, which Val will probably talk about later. But this is a fascinating map to study. Actually, this next image is a detail of it, because you can see McAfee Bridge is basically Holcomb Bridge, where Holcomb Bridge is. It goes over the river, the Chattahoochee River. But this is a map Val and I are going to spend some time on because of all the names that are on this map, and determining, where people lived and how these roads intersected and how people traveled. This is another map, Civil War era map. And the thing that I like about this is that you see the Roswell factory up at the top of this map. And one of the things I like to point out with this is that you notice that Roswell is spelled with 2 S's. And there's some lore out there that Dunwoody's only spelled their names with 1 O and not 2 O's, but I've seen a lot of records. Spelling at this period was kind of random. And so I see Dunwoody, for example, with 2 O's and 1. Roswell, usually you see with 1 S and not 2 S's. But you see the Roswell factory at the top there. You see the bridge that goes over the river. That was built around, what year did I have that? The early 1860s, the bridge was built. And then you go back down, and again, you see these landmarks, the Ebenezer Church, and then you see the Providence Church, which is basically in Dunwoody. And there are several families that really were prominent that you can still witness in the area, if you will. The Hembry and Howes are 2 roads. They're up in Roswell. They were in the Roswell, Milton area. And I like this image of Maddie Hembry House. She was born in 1835. So this is a little bit of a later image, but her father came to the area in the 1820s, 1830s, and were some of the original white, European settlers. They as well came from South Carolina. A lot of people came from Virginia too. These folks came from South Carolina. And I particularly like this because it shows her working at her spinning wheel. And Roswell Historical Society has some cottons that they wove as well. So we really have a real history of the fabric production and cotton growth and weaving in this area. And this image, even though it's circa 1900, the thing I wanted to show here is that at the time, all the road systems were really very poor. And I'll show you in a second a railroad map. And the railroads really weren't really coming into the area strongly enough for Roswell Manufacturing to use them. Transportation was constantly a problem for Roswell Manufacturing Company. So from Roswell, what they did was go west to Marietta. And I like this picture because you can see all these large bales of cotton, being brought in by all the local farmers who are getting cash crop, cash money for their cotton crops. And this is a railroad map. This, again, studying the railroads has become very fascinating to me. But on the left arrow, you see Marietta. And you'll see for the cotton, they would go to Marietta with the cotton. They'd take that rail system, and I think that was called the Western Railroad. And they would take it down near Atlanta, and then they would take the Georgia Rail all the way over to Augusta. And then they would go south to Charleston with the South Carolina Railroad. And the railroads were in Georgia, they were really created to compete with the South Carolina rail system because they discovered, as you can see, this is an 1839 railroad map, pretty early. And Georgia was losing a lot of their commerce to Charleston because they weren't competing sufficiently with the railroad systems. So post-Civil War, we have, as I said, Roswell was established in 1854 as a town with the factory. Well, Roswell King brought with him 5 families from the Georgia coast to establish that, wealthy people to establish the town. 2 of those families were the Bullocks and the Dunwoodys. And Charles Archibald Dunwoody is the namesake of the town of Dunwoody. His parents were Jane Bullock Dunwoody and John Dunwoody. John's the one who came with Roswell King. Post-Civil War, he moved from Roswell, came across the river, if you will, and decided to settle in what we now call Dunwoody. And so he built a house right about where, if you know where it is, Spalding Drive and Chamblee Dunwoody intersect, about the Redlands, where the Redlands subdivision is. And Charles was, one of the things I want to tell you about Charles, he went to the Franklin Institute. You're probably familiar with that as being the precursor, if you will, to UGA in Athens. So he went to the Franklin Academy, rather. But he built his house, and he post-Civil War. He's buried at the cemetery at the Roswell Presbyterian Church, which was established with the town. It's a cool cemetery if you've never been there. It's right on Roswell Road. Very, very cool. And so on the right, I show you, starting in 1889, he applied for veterans benefits because he had been wounded. And so there's a whole series of his documents that show that he was wounded in Virginia. I believe it was Virginia by a gunshot that went into his hip. And so he continued to get $50 a year for his service for that wound, if you will. So fast forward a little bit, we have Dunwoody, and then this is a cool image, I think, of Dunwoody in 1958. So I love this. You can see the horses. You can see, so Charles Dunwoody came and established the post office here. And this is a later image of the post office. It was the store and the post office and the train depot, and the train's not there anymore. In the distance, this photograph is heading west, if you will. So you see that on the left, this corner of Chamblee Dunwoody Road in Mount Vernon, and straight ahead is what's today the chapel for Dunwoody United Methodist Church. And then here's just a closer image of that that store. Across the street was a gin. I think it was a grist mill, a gin, not cotton, but anyway, it was a very, very much country, very, very rural area until the really 60s and 70s. So well, that's it for me. I was going to hand over to Val. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask now? I can ask later. Okay, off to you, Val.
Oh, there's
Okay.
I see a question.
Questions.
Where did you get your pictures? Jennifer wants to know.
These two, well, let's see, go back. These two came from Valerie. Those Valerie got, they're in the files. I mean, the rest of them are, it's a wide variety. This is from Roswell Historical Society. The maps, I get all my maps from the Library of Congress website, and I can give you links for those if anybody wants them. Roswell Manufacturing. This I got from the internet, interestingly enough, a family tree. Dookie elf. So, sorry, my dog's about to take over.
Okay, so. All right, time for me to share screen.
Mm-hmm. I'm out. There you go.
Let me get to the right place. There we go. Okay, does that look okay? Can y'all see? On my screen, the words are covered up. Does it look like that for YouTube?
Nope, you're all good.
We can see it.
Okay, good. Great, thank you. Okay, hi everyone, I'm Valerie, and I'm going to pick up in 1870 and move on into the history of Donaldson-Bannister Farm, which is a big part of Dunwoody history. And as Lynn was saying, cotton farming, of course, was very big in early Dunwoody history, and that includes the Donaldson family. This photograph is of the Donaldson family, including in the front there sitting on the left is William J. Donaldson. And I'm going to call him WJ from now on. And the woman in the middle is his wife, Martha, but she went by Millie, Adams Donaldson. And you've got some of her family, their family right behind there, and sitting is grandchild. So William J. or WJ and Millie are the ones that first built the Donaldson home. Now, one thing that I like to remind people, because we call it Donaldson-Bannister Farm now, but it was Millie's family, the Adams, who actually owned the land. So WJ lucked out that way. They got some land and built a home there. And this is the earliest image we have of it. It's from 1896. And one thing also I will tell you is that WJ was married 2 times before he married Millie, 2 times actually before the Civil War. And he also, he participated in the Civil War. He fought at Vicksburg and was captured. He was part of the 36th Georgia Volunteer Infantry. And he had to sign an oath saying that he would not take up arms again against the United States. And I think we can say that he did not do that, because although he went back into the Confederacy, he only repaired and made shoes. That was his job after he was captured. So I've just got a couple of, okay, this is just the same photograph, but some closer images of WJ and Millie. So these photographs, they're actually from the mid-1930s, but they give us a good idea of how the farm looked in the days of WJ and Millie, because this is right before it was changed by the next owner. But you can see on the left side, the house and a barn that looks like it's kind of fallen down. On the right side, there is you can tell that there's some work beginning on the farm. So the Donaldson family owned it from 1870 when it was built until 1932. In 1900, WJ died, and his wife, she continued to own and run the farm with help from her children for the next 32 years. And that is significant in terms of the home was put on the National Register. And part of the reason why was because of the history of the importance of the women who lived on the farm and owned it and ran it by themselves. So, this is just a cute picture of 2 of the grandchildren of WJ and Millie, Fletcher and Fred Donaldson. And I will tell you that Fred, they've got their goats, but Fred Donaldson is still with us. He was born in 1925, and he's still around, which is really great, because we've been able to talk with him about living on the farm and what it was like. But in 1932, after his grandmother died, the farm was sold and they moved to another location in Dunwoody. So that was the end of the Donaldson ownership. But here's Fred. He fought in World War II. So we've got him with his mother in his uniform, and one of his brothers drove a truck for Sears. So I really like that picture of him in his Sears truck. So these are some of the grandchildren of the original owner. So on the left, I've got a little photo of the monument for WJ and Millie. And the Donaldson Cemetery is on the property of Donaldson-Bannister Farm. That's their monument. There are 27 graves total. And the cemetery is there. It's still owned by the family, and they take care of it. On the other side, this is the time that after Millie died, the property went up for auction, and it was advertised in the newspaper. I like how at the bottom it says ladies are especially invited, and there'll be a free barbecue dinner. But basically it was 1932, and there were several children, and no one in particular wanted to stay there or was able to stay there during the Depression. So it was divided up into pieces and sold off. That's kind of the end of what I would call the farming period for Donaldson-Bannister Farm, because we've got some different people that owned it after that. And here they are, and last year they were able to gather the Donaldsons for a family reunion and Fred's birthday. The next owner was Lois Patello from 1932 to 1942. And Lois Patilla was actually a widow and had been married 2 previous times also. She grew up at 137 Elizabeth Street, which is in Inman Park. And she's in the newspaper a few times. This is just one of the articles about her where there was a fire at their house, and she helped her aunt to safety, and then she also rescued her kitten. This is her childhood home, 137 Elizabeth Street. And the reason I included this is the architect of the home is Francis PalmerSmith, and he actually is the person that she hired to remodel the Donaldson farm and make it into a colonial revival style home. And Francis PalmerSmith was a very well-known architect. He was actually head of the School of Architecture at Georgia Tech, and he was in a firm called Pringle and Smith. Designed several homes in Druid Hills and Buckhead, a hotel downtown that was now called the Hotel Indigo, and the Rhodes Haverty building. That's who she hired to remodel her home. And here she is in the newspaper again, and she is actually on the left side of this photo. And it identifies her as Mrs. Lois Patello Near and 2 other women who are playing in a golf tournament at Brookhaven Country Club, which now would be Capital City Country Club. It was known as Brookhaven Country Club at the time. But we have not been able to locate a photograph of Lois. So this is our image of Lois so far. I'm going to keep looking, though. We don't give up. So Lois she commissioned her remodel by Francis PalmerSmith. And so these photographs are actually taken during that time period. So you can see a new barn is being constructed over to the right, and things are happening. It's going to change. This is one of the things, this is actually a very current photo, but one of the things she did was she built this brick wall up on a hill, and the whole area in front of that wall was filled with boxwoods and paths and flowers, and it was a boxwood garden. She gave the property the name Boxwood Farm, and that name stuck for a long time. the next 2 or 3 owners still called it Boxwood Farm. The reason it looks like the grass looks like it does now is the last owners, they built a swimming pool there, so, which had to be filled in, and that's why you see that shape. The next owners that came in were from 1942 to 1946, and that was, excuse me, Charles and Jeanette Roberts. And we don't know a lot about them because for a long time, we actually thought maybe they just owned it and never lived there, but some recent information, including this document, which we were able to find at DeKalb County, shows that they did actually owned it. And then some of the older residents in Dunwoody we've been able to talk to remember the Roberts children. They had 2 girls, Peggy, Jean, and Charlotte. And the memories that people have of them are riding horses with them and swimming in the swimming pool. So the swimming pool, let me describe that to you, was actually just below the house on Vermac Road. There's a creek, and Lois Patello Bannister built a swimming pool into the creek with stone and concrete, and it was very elaborate. It had a changing house and picnic tables, sort of typical. A few people had summer homes in Dunwoody and just beyond Dunwoody and Sandy Springs during this time period, and it was very common for them to have a swimming pool with bathhouses and have elaborate parties, which was quite different from how everyone else was living in the area because they were very small farmers who were just getting by. The next family is the Ogdens. We've got Henry Ogden, and his wife is Leila Harris Ogden. I like this photograph because I'll show you another picture later, but this is the porch, and Henry Ogden's out there with his dogs, of course, but if you see the detail around the porch, that actually disappeared later, and then another owner even later brought it back. So it's just one of the details that we still have at the farm. But Henry Ogden worked for Atlanta Paper Company, and during World War II, he and his wife and family, they lived with his wife's parents, who were Arthur and Irma Harris. So there's a connection there. He worked for Atlanta Paper Company, and his father-in-law was the president of Atlanta Paper Company. So they lived with them, and the place they lived was 1509 Ponce de Leon Avenue, which is part of the Paideia School now. But after World War II was over, they moved to Donaldson-Bannister Farm. They moved to this farm, or Boxwood Farm as it was called at the time. Their children, this is one of them on the left there, is Meredith Ogden. And the other child is Hank Ogden. They've been back and shared history with us, which is really great. They've told us what it was like to live there as children and growing up. And they told us about the other families in the area. So we're talking 1946 to 1956. Definitely other people were small farmers, just getting by, barely getting by in some cases. But, and Leila Harris Ogden is also in that photograph there on the right. They did have horses on the farm. So we've got Meredith and Hank riding horses. They had a very nice childhood while they were living there. Lots of property to run around on. Here's Meredith in the swimming pool that I was just describing. It was actually built into a creek, and her brother is behind her there. And the photograph on the right, she remembers as she was dressed up to go to the Atlanta Opera, and then she was going to be going to a dance. And she's sitting, I don't know if anyone's ever been in the house, I know Lynn has, but She's sitting under the stairs in an area that is now enclosed with it's no longer there, it's a closet. So I really like that picture. And here they are, sister and brother visiting the farm in 2018, which gave us a chance to record them and get these wonderful pictures. So that's just great. Okay, so the Donaldson-Bannister Farm is changing hands again from 1956 to 1974. It belonged to the Smith family, and that is Frank and Hortense Smith. If you can see, it's probably hard to see, but the mailbox there, the sign says Henry H. Ogden Boxwood Farm still, but this is one of the photographs of the Smiths. So when they moved there, that was still there. The really large tree that's in front of the house will be important in a later slide also. These are some buildings that the Smiths had photographs of that are no longer there because, well, the property was, well, okay, let me go back. Lynn and I talked about this. We've talked about this many times, but there's actually a story that's been handed down that W.J. Donaldson used to say he had 1,000 acres and he could walk all the way to Chamblee and never leave his property. That in trying to prove that and getting property records, we've really only come up with about 600 acres, which is still a lot, but 600 acres. And then at the time of that auction in 1932, there were 200 acres. And then after it was broken into pieces and sold off, the house and land was 26 acres. And so that's what the families after that had. And still at this point, they had 26 acres. And this red barn and guest house were still part of the property. And Frank Smith was, he owned a nursery business. So he put greenhouses on the farm and was growing poinsettias, you can see here, and other plants while they lived on the farm. His actual nursery business was on Roswell Road inside 285, where there's a Pike Nurseries now. And that's one of their children, Frank Smith. Excuse me for a moment. I'm gonna let y'all look at that car. Okay, my husband says that's a Dodge Challenger, but I don't know. If anyone else has an idea what they think that is, can let me know. And Bonnie Smith was the other child that lived there while Frank Smith and his wife owned the farm. And she has also returned to the farm with her husband and shared her memories and some photographs. We actually have her to thank for those old photographs. We don't have anything directly from Lois Patello Bannister, but some of her, I think, nieces or nephews came to the farm many years later when the Smiths lived there and gave them a book of photographs that are really important to us now, and we wouldn't have them if they hadn't have done that. So it's great. So the farm changes hands again. 1975, it goes to Linda and David Chestnut. And I did spell that correctly in case anyone's wondering. This family is Chesnut. And David's family has a long history in Chamblee. His, I think it was either his grandfather or great-grandfather, he said, owned a lot of land right where Chamblee, Tucker Road and I-85 come together. But this is a good picture to represent the Chestnut family because they were known for having horses and donkeys, and people in Dunwoody would stop by and feed and pet the horses. It's a really beautiful picture, and there's that tree again. But in 1998, tornado came through Dunwoody, and that tree came down, and you can see here how badly damaged the house was at that point. And again, the tornado we've got on the left there, the building's covered with tarps. Now, this is not a very good photograph on the right, but I like it because it shows David Chestnut right after the damage. And I can just imagine how he was feeling at that point. All the damage done to the house, but they did restore it. They brought it completely back to its glory. Now, here's that porch. If you remember earlier, I was trying to point out the detail on the porch. And so it's not there in this picture, but when they restored the home, they found a little piece of that fretwork, is what Linda called it, and they duplicated it. And now the porch has that fretwork back around it again. So does the well house also has it. So now fast forwarding to today, first of all, let me tell you that the Chestnuts owned it through 2005. And then the farm was, in order to save it, there was a lot of work done by the Dunwoody Preservation Trust, and DeKalb County was very helpful and put some funds into saving the property. And it was owned by DeKalb County for a few years until Dunwoody became a city, and then it became part of Dunwoody's Parks Department. So it is a park. The property is opened from sun up to sundown, just the outside. The inside, it's really has to be by appointment or for events. And these are two of our events. We've been having Camp Flashback the last few years, which is great because kids come and do the kind of things they would do on a farm, and there's no technology, which I think is a great thing. And Apple Cider Days is the event on the right. So the house, all the several years that it kind of sat empty during DeKalb County and then the city ownership, and everybody was trying to figure out what to do with it. There was a lot of damage and deterioration, but Dunwoody Preservation Trust and the city worked together, raising money and restoring it, rehabilitating it. So it is now a place where we can have events, private events and community events. I think I got one more picture of how it looks, basically how it looks today. So, all right, so that was it for me. Do we have some questions?
I think, Valerie, that they want to also know where you got your pictures from. And then somebody said that was a 1969 Camaro.
Really? Oh, that's great. Wait, do I need to do stop share or something?
No, I think it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, I can't see the questions.
I just see on chat, and if you share, I couldn't see them when I shared.
Okay, well, my photographs, some of them came from the various families. Really, most of them did. The very oldest picture came from Fred Donaldson and his daughters. And then we have the other old pictures. Those were taken during Lois Patello Bannister's time period, but we were able to get them thanks to the Smith family. And then the Ogden family shared photographs. The Chestnuts, I'm still working on getting some more photographs from them. That's the last owners. And they've been really great in sharing history. We don't have particular photos of them living at the farm. So they came from various places. Are there any other questions?
Well, thank you, Lynn and Valerie. And if you could remind everyone, I know that you have a book too. Is there a great place that you can purchase the book that you've written, Valerie?
Well, I do have a blog, and I have the book. I have a link on my blog, which is past tentsga.com. And so it's available there.
Okay.
It's also available on, of course, the usual places like Amazon, but it's called Images of America Dunwoody. So, and then, but some of these photographs, I did that book about 2009, probably time to do another one because a lot of these photographs are ones that we have acquired since then. And when I say we, I mean Dunwoody Preservation Trust, because I am their historian. So Lynn and I keep trying to collect history and gather things for the Dunwoody Preservation Trust. Any others? Well, I would say I would invite everyone, if it's not too far a drive for you, that this is a nice place. You can come. You can just come and walk around if you need somewhere to walk around and enjoy the outdoors and the sunshine. Just look at the property because it is a park and it is open to the public during the daytime. And DunwoodyPreservationTrust.org is their website where they will tell you what's going on if they have events. We haven't had some events this year, but we actually did. They had apple cider days last weekend by dividing it into time periods where people signed up and keeping it to a very low number. So they had an outdoor event last weekend.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you everyone who stopped by today for this Lunch and Learn. It was a great presentation.
Thank you for
Thank
inviting
you.
us.
Yeah, of course.
Stay fun.
Thank you for
Always,
inviting
always
us.
welcome back.
I like the dog.
He's
There he
good.
is.
He's about had enough.
Thank you.
Bye, Val. Bye, y'all. Thank you.
And I want to remind everyone too that we have another Lunch and Learn actually right before Thanksgiving. So it's on the 24th, and that is 111 places in Atlanta to see. So that's next week. So thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you hopefully next week.
Thank you.